Hey everybody, welcome to the Big Bass Podcast, the fishing show where size matters. My name is Terry Battisti.
And I'm Ken Duke. If you're a regular listener, you know that we're interested in sharing the stories of big bass and the anglers who caught them. But we're also interested in the baits that catch them, the gear, which means we're interested in the people who make those baits. Not long ago, we had Alan Cole, maker of the AC plug, on as our guest. And today, we have another legendary angler and bait maker who has changed the face of trophy bass fishing. He's one of the nicest guys in the sport, one of the smartest guys and most creative guys. His name is Jerry Rago. Jerry, welcome to the Big Bass Podcast.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
It's good to be here. Yeah, definitely. Thanks for coming on, Jerry. It's been a while. It's been 20 years. Well, I wouldn't say 20, maybe 15, since you and I shared a boat together.
Yeah. Maybe 20, Terry.
Well,
we talked one time.
Yeah, it was 2005. Yeah, 2005. Yeah. I still got pictures of that Christmas when you put me on a 10. So.
I didn't put anybody on anything. The bass put himself on your line, but
that was a fun time. Yeah. So why don't we start off with Jerry Rago? How did you get started in fishing? You're from Bishop, California, right?
Originally, I grew up in Southern California, in West Covina area.
Oh, okay.
And my first fish was a bluegill at Lake Lake, a bass at Pudding Stone would be my second fish. I remember when I was little at Lake Lake, my dad snuck into a closed pond, and the guy says, "Hey, you can't fish in there." My dad goes, "I just wanted the kid to catch one." He goes, "Well, how about giving the kid the pole?" But anyways, and then we'd go to the Sierras all the time. Once again, it was mostly Pudding Stone, bass, and catfish. San Gabriel Canyon for trout, and but my dad always wanted to move to Bishop. We always, we went up there 4 times a year, caught our share of fish. Mostly, we wanted the browns, and he decided to move and sell everything he had, and I was about 20, and I had caught. Actually, my biggest browns were out of Silverwood at the time. And,
wow.
But we moved up. But I always won the contest from the time I was 8 years old till 17 years old for kids, in Bishop or whatever. And so we moved up, and my thing was, they said, "Why'd you guys move here?" We were framers, and they didn't need any more construction guys. Local guys. I said, "Well, to catch big browns," and they laughed. And it took about a couple months. I got a 16-pounder, and I think that was just from fishing. I got lucky, but I was starting to hear about things and meet guys, and then when I got the 16-pounder, I met some friends of Alan Cole's, and they said, "You had to join this club, and but you had to get 2 over 10 to get in it." And it took a little while, and I considered myself a bass fisherman with a cream purple worm with 2 spinner blades on it. When I was a kid, but it was bass, But then it became the brown trout, and so I got the big one right away. And it took me a couple of years. I actually got into the stripers, and that familiarized me with fighting bigger fish and getting them in. And so when I was like 24, I went down to LA to work. There was no framing up here. And my uncle was on the stripers, and he had caught a lot of browns at Silverwood too. Nothing over 5 pounds or anything. I had some that were a little bigger, but the striper thing just, when the first one's 25 pounds, you're hooked, And then Silverwood was hot, and then going to Pyramid, and it was just walking the shore. And back then, you'd see it boil, and if you could reach it, you were bit. It just seemed like, and then of course sometimes you get a lot of them, but they just kept getting bigger. And there was a guy named Butch Augustine that was making these big jigs. That was about what was going on, and like I said before, it was the bombers and red fins and big rebels were probably the best lures. And so my uncle was tuned into the stock, and we talked a little bit about, I was going down there and I got way more than my share. There was a guy from Castaic a couple months ago. He said he thought he knew me. Anyway, when I caught most of those fish, probably 100 over 20 pounds, and he was only about 5 years old, so there's no way he knew me. But the guy called me out. I like to get called out. I got a destroyer. I'll bring it. But then I wasn't actually making the lures, but I bought a couple of these lures, and they were a salmon plug, and they were at a yard sale. I thought they were cool. I didn't know what they were. My uncle saw them. I painted them like a rainbow because by then the rainbow pattern was all over the place. And I know that Alan Cole started that, with the Rapalas. But I just happen to know Alan Cole because I was in his club. And I think I said in the pre-show. So my uncle finally talks me out of one of the lures. I wanted to try them. And back then, there was a couple guys making some stuff, but nothing that anybody was going to sell or that was really tearing it up.
Yeah.
And so one day at Lake Pyramid, and like they'd stock in the middle of the week, my uncle, there was 23 stripers caught from, I believe, 19 to 30 pounds that day. And my uncle had all 23.
That's
And,
outrageous. Terry, what single word beginning with the letter I would you use to describe that?
Amazing.
That's not. You're a bad speller. Jerry, I give Terry a hard time. Terry's favorite word is insane, and that is what that is. That is insane.
It is, so Alan Cole was there. I had met Alan Cole through the Brown Trout Club, and I turned him. We both had a mutual friend, best friend for about 20 years. So I tuned him into when to go and all that. I didn't actually take him personally, but I said, hey, you need to go Wednesday night or Thursday night, whatever. And here's what you're going to fish. And mostly, again, it was bombers and redfins. And so when Alan Cole saw what my uncle caught, he was there. He said, where'd you get that? And he said, I got it from Jerry. So Alan happened to come up here fishing. I think he went a little farther north. On the way back, he stopped at my house. I lived in Big Pine, California. And I have pictures of him in my house getting that lure. He had caught a big rainbow trout in Canada. And he took that lure, and in about, I think it was less than 2 weeks, the AC plug was born. And, he jointed it. I think they said his son put the tail on it. But it was pretty nasty from the get-go. And not much has gotten any nastier than that bait as far as twisting and turning. And so that was the start. But I still wasn't. Now, while I made lures, I started making a few. Like I said, I found a Z plug. I didn't know what it was. So I made a couple. I caught a huge striper. Then I found out what it was. I actually met the guy a couple weeks later. It's Greg Silks. Yeah. He gave me some, and that didn't go too well with Alan. But basically, the lure is called a Martin. And here's an original one here.
There's the Z plug right there.
Yeah, that's a jointed one, and that's actually what I used later on. But I had access. I had AC plugs, the Z plug, and then I also had these Martins. My uncle. Everybody started carving these. This one had an eye, or it still does. It kind of follows you. And but it's the darting. And actually, I come to find out about a year ago that this style of bait is called the darter. And it's just kind of took off from there. But I wasn't making the lures yet, and I still didn't have all that many really big fish, except stripers and a few browns, but no double-digit bass. And then I started. When everybody started getting them, I knew that I could do what Alan could do because we fished the same way. And so I started messing around in Paris with Rapalas at first, and then with the bigger baits, but I still didn't make them. And then one day, I started to make the rat, but I still wasn't selling them. I was keeping them a secret, but they were getting fish. I was getting more fish with any other bait, and it just happened to work where I live up in the Owens Valley.
Jerry, tell
And
us a story about how you decided to make the rat, because I think your rats are the best. They're the
so
standard.
I'm a varmint hunter, meaning I would hunt bobcats, coyotes, mountain lions, whatever at night. And so one day I'm driving home from work, and the wind's blowing really hard, and this kangaroo rat tries to run across the highway, and the wind picked it up and blew it through the air. And I thought, when I get home, I'm gonna try to carve a rat because I always liked those big rat flies that were they
The
looked kind of
mouse
like a
flies, the deer hair.
bristle brush. And I
Yeah.
thought if I could make something like that, and I actually stopped at Kmart, which is where that tail you have right there, Terry, came from, and I bought the cream worms. And there's a lot of copies of the rat, and there's still some guys using the cream worm. I make my own, but the first one caught a 5-pounder on the first cast. Then I drove 40 miles, showed a friend, another 5-pounder on the first cast, and we just went around and gutted our little valley for about a week. Just gutted it. And but of course we weren't keeping them or anything. I wasn't say I was a catch and release guy, but there was no reason to keep them. But I sat on that for a while, and then with painting Rapalas, a taxidermist let me use his facilities to paint my Rapalas for Browns. And one day a guy named Steve Harner walks in, and he wants to make baits, but he wants to meet me. He didn't know he's already talking to me, but he wanted his lures painted, and he said, "Hey, let's make some lures." And I said, I want to do that, but we need to make a soft bait, not a hard bait. So he did the investigating and buying the materials and all that, and I made the hard baits for him because I was a carpenter. I'm more familiar with the wood, and so we did some experimenting, and then we finally came across a girl named Cher, and her brother
Chervella.
sold baits, and he was interested in any bait he could get, but he was in Japan, and then her boyfriend at the time was a guy named John Zank, who I still talk to every week, for the last 23 years, and he knew more about it because he was a worm guy, and then also another friend was Scott Whitmer, who's a friend of yours, Terry,
Yep.
and we just started putting our heads together. I had an idea for a bait. I was
Well, let's talk about the generic trout, because the generic trout came out before the rat did. And what was your whole thing? Because I remember when that time that we first met on Paris in 2000, 2001, it was that winter. So it was January or December, January. We literally fished for a week in different boats, but we were on the same three lakes: Paris, Castaic, and Casitas, I think it was.
So what happened was that my partner at the time, Steve Harner, we're still messing with the baits, and they didn't quite swim right, but they were getting there. And with the little input from Zank and Whitmer, we're learning how to make the molds better or whatever. But right then, there was all of a sudden a split was beginning. But I hooked up with Scott Whitmer because he knew some things, and he made a lot of worms and reapers and small plastics. But I already had a bait, and the generic trout hard bait I was making out of wood, and it was different. It had it had a nice shape, and it had a different tail than say the AC plug, but mine looked more like a trout with full fins. And I believe in full fins, that when the fish sees that bait and sees the fins, it's already locked in its head. Or let's just say a stripe on the side like a bass. That's a bass. That's a trout. And that was how I was thinking. But in the Osprey, when we started a company called Osprey, and it was going to be soft baits mostly. There was hard baits. But they were a real slow bait, and I wanted to go fast. So we were starting to break up before we even got started. And if it wasn't for meeting a couple people, probably wouldn't have done it. But I didn't want to make wood anymore. I had access to really good cedar from my job, but just all the carving and everything, trying to do it after work.
And we had the night at Lake Paris, after you guys got the 18, the 12.5, and the 9.5, we were sitting down at Denny's in Paris,
right?
And that's when we came up with Polywood.
So the Zank, his company, he made molding, but he was a former, he made lures, but for a living he made molding. and it was called polymold. And then the poly was the resin that he was using for most of the stuff. And then I was putting sawdust in them, but I couldn't find enough sawdust to make it float. So it just so happened Scott Whitmer had these materials in his garage. And the reason I knew about the material was I was walking through a casino in Vegas after striper fishing, and these guys, they had steel poles, and they're clamping these molds on and pouring this yellow, looked like pancake batter. And in 5 minutes, they popped this mold off, and it looked like a palm tree, like cut off branches. And I said, "What is that?" And they said, "Castable urethane." So going with that, and then it turned out that most lure makers already had the material to use to reproduce their worms to make molds. And then with Scott Whitmer, we're trying to float them in the sink. They wouldn't float, so we ended up putting the micro balloons that you would put in a rubber worm, and it worked. And the very first bait I still have to this day, and it swims absolutely perfect. I just never wanted to lose it, but I started making the rats first, but I wasn't selling the rats. But then the first batch of trout came out way better than anybody could ever imagine. They were smooth. Anything that's in the mold is on the bait, but you had to weight it because a piece of wood would float like this, but with the weight, keel the weight, and of course we had to weight the plastic. So actually Terry, you came up with the polywood, with the name Polywood, and then but later on, I wish I would have patented that.
No kidding. I mean,
every bait by it was made by even big companies have made their baits out of the castable urethane. One notable was the DRT company. It's pretty new now, and then also there was the Depths slide swimmer was made out of these materials. They both got away from it because in Japan there's a lot of humidity. It's really terrible if you live in a humid place trying to make the baits. Scott and I had trouble down there in Huntington Beach, but I happen to live at 4,400 feet in a valley that has 7% humidity, and the air is trapped in here. It's 14,000 feet on both sides, and so it was really good for me to make molds and baits to live in this area.
Jerry,
and of course you can use a vacuum chamber, but you got to be really fast. But
you mentioned
but that was Go ahead.
So you mentioned the DRT, a Japanese company, Division Rebels Tackle, and they're famous for the Clash 9 that a lot of folks who are big on chasing big bass are familiar with. Was that bait ever made out of that same resin?
No, but I actually did an interview with him a week ago in person with interpreters, and but basically they got away from the resin. It was made out of resin, or a lot of its baits were, but they got away from it because of the humidity. They didn't have consistency.
Gotcha.
And then at a time I heard that, and hopefully I don't get anybody mad, but I heard that they could only make so many baits a month, and that's what Butch Brown was using at Lower Castaic, was the slide swimmer from Depths, and it was made out of resin, but they had to be tuned later on. But both companies went straight to injection after that, and they could only produce so many, and it was smart. It was. I wish I have injected baits now, but I wish I had it back then. But a lot of the baits that weren't available, and people didn't know if they could make a big mold like that or whatever. But you can make. I always said, I think I can make a lot of money making molds of movie stars' wives. And I said, you need to go down to the office because they already did it. And she's painted gold. You know what I mean? Down at Philpack there. But,
some of the conversations I have with John are, I wonder, where does he come up with
it's just, see, the one thing he liked is I actually made my molds the opposite direction. That he told me to do it, and he always told me he liked the fact that I didn't lean on him. You know what I mean? I made my own thing
to give you all the answers. Yeah,
different way. Yeah, just But it's the generic trout too was also, there was a little lull between with the AC plug and the castaic, there was a little lull in there where there was anything else. And then I came along with something that was, I don't know if it's prettier than the castaic. It's just, but it was something different that people needed. You know what I mean?
Well, it had a
Before the
completely
big
different. It had a
rubber-
completely different action. I mean,
Yeah,
the generic trout was an amazing, S swim, right? I mean,
yeah. And it was
it's
a natural swim. And then later on, I called it the live trout, and I actually had the generic trout had the joint in front of the dorsal fin. I'm sorry, behind it. And then the live trout was basically the same body, but the joint was behind or in front of the dorsal fin. And what that caused was one was a natural swimming bait, and the other one had a choppy action that looked like it was scared. And I called it the scared action. And so when I met for the first time with the Japanese buyers, um, after we'll talk about Captain Greg later. But basically, when I told the buyer he said, "What's the difference?" and I said, "One's scared and one's not." And they immediately they bought uh, about $90,000 worth, and but it still took a year to make them, and you still had to pay your rent and buy your material. It wasn't free money. But
You raise a great topic there for us, Jerry, because I watch all these boutique style big bait makers out there, and they'll drop 100, 200, 300 baits at a time, and they're
Right.
scooped up in minutes at really high prices, $250, $300, $500, $600. So obviously you're an
Right.
extraordinarily wealthy man. We know that. We know.
Oh yeah,
We know you live like Bill Gates.
I live in a 2-bedroom mobile home.
Well,
But I'm gonna move up. I met someone at this late age, and anyways,
well, that's awesome.
we got plans. We
thrilled
got
for
plans for more lures. But basically, so
But-
those
but-
baits, in
But
the
it's so
beginning,
tough.
I didn't.
It's so tough to make baits the way you were making baits one at a time by hand. I don't think people appreciate the amount of labor and skill that goes into that. Can you talk to us about that a little bit? So especially some of your early stuff. How much time was invested in each bait to get it completed?
Well, it depends. That first generic trout probably took about a year to get the body the way I wanted. Still not a lot of detail. I'm not a carver. I'm a builder. But later on, you can get really fast. But still, just pouring them one at a time. And say you make 6 molds, you're pouring 6 at a time. You still got to sand them and put them together and test them. You got to weight them. Later on, learned how to put the weights in the mold and stuff. But these baits that are being sold in the beginning, I believe some of those baits that were high dollar, I believe the guy that put them on eBay was buying them himself for publicity.
Ah,
Okay, and then there was a lull in that for several years
clever.
where there wasn't high dollar baits. The one guy that was kind of a competitor of mine, he was going to sell his bait for a certain price. So I made a bigger bait that I believe was better. His detail was better, but I believe my action was better. And so I sold it for $300. I sold about 250 of those baits, but they're not for everybody. But mine are to fish with, and if you're collecting them, I'm not going to sell it to you. Nowadays, these guys, there's some really incredibly simple baits with no detail or anything, and guys are asking $1,000. And they just,
yeah.
but there's people that buy them because those baits aren't getting fished. And later on, I worked with Livingston Lures, and they wanted crankbaits from me. But a friend put me together with them, and it went pretty good. And I said I got to meet a lot of the pros and learn what they wanted. And let me tell you, the pros, they could give a rat's about what I ever caught. They could care less. They want to know what they're going to catch. And the first one, I made about 45 crankbaits for them when I'm a big bait guy. And probably only about 15 different bodies, but I put different lips, figured out which one swam the best, and one stuck out, and they all chose it. Livingston had like 6 pros: Brent Chapman, Hank Cherry, Byron came in there,
Yep.
Jeff Creed,
Maybe
and
Randy Howell.
Hank Cherry won the Classic twice. Randy Howell won the Classic.
Yeah.
They picked a pretty good crew there, but what really happened was when I took the baits, we met at ICAST. Everybody signed off. This one bait I had just swam a little different than the rest, and it was ready to go. They chose that one. Then they disappeared, and they're telling me, "Oh, you're back there in California. You took the baits home. You took the prototypes." What happened was Hank Cherry they fell in his pocket somehow. And anyways, he spit them up later, and that became the Howler. And so first year, first bait, they got a Bassmaster Classic.
Yeah, Randy
We all know
Howell
he used
wins
it
that
Paula,
2014 Classic on Gunnersville on the Howler, which
Right.
got named in that press conference, by the
Sure.
way.
Right.
Yep.
Byron Velvick and I are sitting there, and I said, "What's the bait?" And he said, well, it's just this. Well, we don't have." I said, "Let's call it the Howler because Randy Howell." So I had a little bit of involvement in that. I hope Byron will back me up on it.
Yeah, and they called me, and we all cried that night when he won. You know, I left Livingston. It was you know, I should have stayed there, but there's some things I didn't want to do. But and it was in Texas. You know, I could have made it. It reminded me of Southern California, but anyways, the only thing I got to say about that whole thing is you know, when I make a bait every day, I made something this morning that could change the world. You know what I mean? For a little while, but basically, is every day I'm trying to make something that outfishes or outswam or whatever that I made the day before, and I can't believe that my number doesn't ring off the every day. It blows my mind, and I'm calling you guys, all you pros. I'm calling you out right now. You know, they believe me. I love the pros. I love talking to them, but they all want the bait with their name on it, and I don't think it's just the pro. It's the companies, whether it's, you know, Berkeley or Strike King. They want the pro's name on there. They don't want Jerry Rago's name on there, and I don't have a problem with that. It's just but when somebody makes something, you got to say, "Hey man, what else you got in that bag?" You know what I mean? It's just because I believe I've had several home runs, obviously with 4 Bassmaster wins. Shaw Grigsby, Byron, they both won with the same bait. Skeet won with the SKT Swimmer, and then Randy Howell with the Howler. But things get mixed up. You know, everybody wants to be the top guy. So just you know.
So let's go into the BV3D and how that came about. You know, back in your soft bait, right?
So I started slowing down. So basically, people bought the baits because I was catching big fish, and they paid attention.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started slowing down. Other baits came out. Clear Lake took a dump. There was no bite for like 3 years. And then so like where the Osprey was doing really good there, that slowed down. They weren't selling, and they even closed the doors for a little while. And but I was next door because I founded that company with Steve Harner. So literally next door. So the guy went to work for me, and I kept saying, "We got to come up with something new." And I made the tool bait, which was pretty successful. But Spro came out with the same bait. But I made the baits for their pro step. And you know, that was very disappointing or whatever. But I had to come up with something, so I made about 15 different baits, and said like, and that's when I decided to go after the pros. And I talked to stores in Clear Lake. Oh yeah, we want to order them, but we didn't. You know, and then so the baits I made, I wasn't selling any of them. They were too new, too scary. But basically, Tom Leogrand, he's a football coach now. He put me next to Skeet. at a show so that Skeet could see what I had. So Skeet liked the baits. Byron wasn't at that show, but I had these two that stuck out, and one had a lazy action, just like the hard baits, and one had a choppy action, that pumped harder. And so I knew Clear Lake was coming, and I had like a financial partner, and so we built a new shop. We built everything, all the ventilation, everything was a really cool shop. And so the first baits I made about 100 of them. And he goes, "Hey, who are these for?" Now remember, these two baits didn't sell at a show. I sold like 8 of them, and but Skeet had them in mind, and Byron hadn't seen it yet. So I made these baits, and my partner says, "Where are those going?" I go, "Oh, I'm giving them away." He goes, "What do you mean you're giving them away? Look at them. They're pretty awesome." And he says, so I go, "Well, these two guys I know, they're coming to Clear Lake. If one of them happens to win or place high, we'll be rolling." And turned out both guys won. But basically, Itch Monroe and Bub Tosh, they had a couple, and they met Byron for dinner and told him, "If you fish this bait, you're gonna win." And Byron, I got him to him. I had already mailed him to his house. He hadn't been home for a long time. So I mailed him some. He got him. And he calls me after the first day and says, "I'm in first place and I got a 10-pounder." And
At Clear Lake.
but he's going to run out. So the next day I had to make baits all day, and I drove to Clear Lake. And so I got there for the third day, and he was still in front. And the technique he was using, pulling him through the weeds, was perfect. He was in the spot where he won 10 years earlier. Everything was working. And so the third night, we're in the restaurant, and I'm with Tom Leogrand, and he comes walking up and goes, "Hey, what are you doing here, man?" He goes, "Hey, I got the baits." And he says, he goes, said, "Are you using them?" And he goes, "No, I'm using an osprey and this and that, whatever it was." And I go, "Well, no, he said they swim good." And I go, "No, well, you need to swim them a little more." And then he goes, "Oh, okay." So he walks away. His whole family was there. It was up at Clear Lake.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, he comes across this Mexican restaurant. He rolls his rolling chair, right? Rolls it all the way across the restaurant, looks at me and goes, I know why the F you're here." And he goes, "You brought baits." And I go, I just said, I couldn't tell him. I can't tell him, I just said, just fish him. So on the last day, Skeet, I think he was like in 6th place. He's too far back, but he had, I think he might have had the big bag the last day. But anyways, Byron wins, and then we told him. He says, "Well, I want the baits. The next tournament's going to be at Smith Mountain in Virginia on the other coast." So we talked Skeet into fishing the other bait, the hard choppy bait, that kicked harder. And then of course he won. So when Skeet Reese called me during practice and says, "Hey man, it's over." Like, "What do you mean it's over? Did you bomb out or whatever?" This is practice. Goes, "No man, I'm telling you, if the wind blows, it's over because everybody won't be able to see their fish, and I'll roll the bait through the beds. They're gonna." He couldn't have been more right. So I had to overnight the baits. So I also overnighted Byron about 40 baits. And then Byron calls me and says, "Hey, thanks for the baits, but it's not a swim bait." Yeah, I couldn't rat out him on Skeet.
No.
On Skeet, on Byron's bites, and I couldn't. I said, he goes, "Yeah, they're not biting." I go, all I said was, "Why did I just send Skeet Reese 40 baits?" And he goes, "I don't know. How come?" And anyway, Skeet started back, I think, in 8th place, and he came from behind, and Skeet had it's the second greatest margin of victory in the history of the Bassmasters, because he was catching 7-pounders on every cast, and he actually quit a couple hours early and sat down, and he quoted the guy that copied my tool lure. He said, "Game over." And it couldn't have been better. And actually Byron helped. Once again he went in the booth and he was talking about Skeet and the bait and everything. And they had a guy laying between Skeet's legs, filming everything. Actually, it was Zona was laying between his legs. That's what it was. But it couldn't have been better for me, except that I had to work 7 months with not one day off. To keep up. And I'm not kidding either. It was pretty brutal, but it was fun. And then actually Byron was telling me, how come you're not selling that bait for $60? Because it was 24, I believe. Like I can't do that. You know what I mean? But maybe I should have. And
I mean,
It's a plastic bait. I mean, a plastic bait it's a $25 to $30 maximum bait, right? I mean,
yeah, and you could charge more, and guys are doing it. There's a guy out here used to run a skateboard magazine. He really knows how to do publicity, and he's got a bait, and people are buying them like crazy. And I don't care for the bait, but he's a better businessman than me, and he gets a few fish. It's just a matter of who you can get. But it's not about. Here's the thing: it's not about catching them anymore out here. It's about the bait and the clothing and the handle on your reel, and it's makes it tough because I still think I can go out and whack them and sell some more baits, but it's not always like that.
Well, Jerry, what do you think about the way all that's gone now? Because you have companies selling $300 handles for bait casters.
Right.
Where it's more, the handles cost more than most of the reels I have.
Right.
It's shocking to me.
I find it hard to believe. Now I'm actually personally friends with the guy now. He actually came to my booth and met me and started crying, and that was one of the big highlights of my career. And then we ended up doing a podcast, of course, with interpreters. But I don't know if that's going to ever come out. It got a little crazy, but the guy, the DRT, Samoa looked up to me, and I didn't know that, but he's the one making the money. But the handle thing, once again, sometimes we change our handles or whatever, but it's crazy. Maybe lures are the wrong thing to sell. So.
You mentioned the guy from DRT making a lot of money. They have a really interesting marketing strategy they use in Japan. They make obviously just a limited number of baits. They let each retail outlet know exactly how many they're going to get, and that number is single digits. And then each retailer decides how they're going to sell the baits to the consumer. And what they'll do is they'll say, okay,
sure,
your printed receipt is your entry, and we're going to have a drawing. And even then, even when if you win the drawing, you still have to pay an outrageous amount of money to get that bait. That's a really interesting way.
Yeah, they hooked up with a guy. So there's a guy in NorCal that I met. He actually bought the first generic trout that was ever for sale. And I talked to him. He didn't buy it from me. He bought it from my distributor, which was Uma X. And so he bought the bait, called me up, asked me how to use it and everything. But basically, he was a stone cold hitman for me. And everybody always say, "Hey, what do I got to do to be on your pro staff?" And I go, "You got to be able to outfish me and Skeet Reese and Byron Feldick." You know what I mean?
It was the no staff.
But I couldn't. I tried to send baits to every charity that I could. You know what I mean? The ones that really mattered, but it's hard to do. And but this guy, so DRT hooked up with him. And so he knew, what to do, how to get them in the stores. But basically, everybody thinks you just make things in China. But injection there's a pecking order, or I should say a list. And DRT's on that list too. Meaning they're not making thousands and holding back. They're barely getting with enough to sell. Because the market's so flooded with other companies that are making, let's just say, cheaper baits that we don't even know about, a lot of them. But you think you just sent something to China, but you don't. My guy is so swamped. Actually, 6 cents took him over. And they're spending tons of money. I don't know if we'll get in trouble for mentioning anybody else, but I don't care. I mean, just kind of, I heard that guy started out painting Lucky Crafts, is what I heard. But he's big now, and then he's got a big a pro staff guy, and they're getting some big bass at that. Is it OIV?
OHIV.
OHIV? One of
Yeah.
these California guys is going to take notice and go spank those fish. It's just nobody wants to leave anymore. But this hitman guy that I was talking about, his name's Rafael Rossi. He says, "Hey man, what do you say we go?" You know what I mean? And it's a deep bite, which to me, 25 feet. I'm 25, 24/7, 365. That's what I like to do. But and somebody's going to go over there. Whether it's, I don't think it's going to be, Butch and I, Butch Brown, we're getting up there. And then I got 6 grandkids all of a sudden.
Yeah, but
either way.
But Jerry, I mean, I remember when you and Greg did we're going to catch a 40-pound tiger muskie. We're going to catch a 40-pound lake trout. I mean, I was there with you on Pineview in Utah, shoveling snow to launch the boat.
Right.
There's nothing for you to just drop everything and go to OHIV for 3 weeks and do your thing. I mean, what's stopping you?
Well,
Is it the kids?
Yeah, there's other priorities. You know what I mean? My kids are, in their early 30s, and the grandkids are, 7 to 10. But, they're catching every little birthday and everything. It all matters. But I can tell you right now, if I went to that lake, I'm not spending more than 3 days. Because I think that my stuff is first strike. Here it is right now. Taken, you witnessed it. And, it was, on when they, in the Osprey, when we got notoriety and Greg Villa from Japan noticed that, they did an article on all the guys that were fishing the Osprey, but I got left out. And I was a little irritated about it. And then, so he said, well, you're not really a bass guy. This is like, September. And I said, guess what? On December 1st, I'm proclaiming myself a bass guy. And December 28th, we had the lake record at Paris. So it's just
18-pounder.
I just saw Will Steele today. This morning he was in town. So we're still
Nice.
buddies. He lives in Idaho. And you know how those guys are. But
Terry, that's what it takes. Terry, you and I just have to be bold. Today and from now on, Terry and I are bass guys.
That's it.
okay.
That's all there is to it. Hey, not only that, we're like Jerry Rago. We're big bass guys.
Well,
All right,
Terry
so-
knows the truth. It's just a wonder if you can handle the truth. But, so, I got to tell you that one of the toughest things for me was the day that Paul Elias was winning the tournament and that with the Alabama rig.
Yes,
And,
I know you had come up with that design.
I didn't come up. I'm not going to tell you.
He didn't come up with
I
it.
will tell you that I have the patent,
Yeah.
and also Mans has the patent too. And the difference is my wires are separated, and the Alabama rig patent, the wires come out. They're all coming out of the same spot. And look, I got paint on my fingers. I didn't smash my finger, but I was painting this morning. But
With Terry, it's nail polish. But, yeah.
yeah, well, but anyways, they. I can tell you that before that show with Paul Elias, I had 100 double digits on the umbrella rig before that ever happened, and it just no one's
And
actually done it.
I've
Say
been
again,
with Jerry. I've been in Jerry's boat probably. It's more than a half a dozen times, and we have trolled. I mean, it was 2000, 2001 when you introduced me to
Sure.
that fishing, and it was amazing. But who back then? Because you were selling the generic trout back then for $325, I think. For $325 back in 2000, right?
Well, no, that was the big tool. The generic trout was about
The tool.
yeah, the generic trout was about 100, The tool's 13 inches, 3 and 4 joints. It was basically like a mounted trout. A lot of people don't know. I see a lot of trout. There's a creek in front of my shop. I went and caught a trout and made a mold of it. And I'm like I said, I'm not much of a. I can carve a lot better now, but I could build the shape, and I know what they look like. They're hanging all over my living room. But
Yeah.
basically, like I said, it was the profile thing, and then so I filed for the umbrella rig. There's different ones. There's a lot of striper guys that did it, but they never did it for bass. And but basically, my lawyer asked me one time. He says, "So, what do you think the fish think when they see, all the wires?" And I said, "Well, the way I look at it, because the trout baits are so much better than say little grubs or whatever. I was putting $35 baits on the umbrella rig, and and you lose five or six at a time, it hurts a little bit. And so my lawyer says, what do they think about those wires?" And I said, "Well, you just got to make sure the lures look good, because if there's 5 women walking down the street wearing bikinis and they got a wire sticking out of their head, are you going to look at the wire?" And the bass, I think they see the baits and they never look at the wire. And I believe because it's multiple baits, they never
Yeah.
see the rig, because they're focused. Am I going to get one of those, or am I getting both, or am I getting them
Yeah.
all?
I'm with you. There's an old Chinese proverb that says, "The fish sees the bait, not the hook. A person sees the gain, not the danger."
That's I say the fish eats the lure, and the only thing more important is the hook, and more important than that is the line. With Scott Whitmer, we used to always talk about when they were what the bait looks like. You know what I mean? And then
Yep.
what is the most important part. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think fish notice the hooks on most baits at all. I think
No.
we give fish too much credit.
Yeah.
um, their mouth is that big on a bass. That's that big
I
for
want
a
to fish
reason.
where you're fishing if they're that big.
Yeah, it's my local waters. I catch a lot of fish, but we have these weeds that weren't here 10 years ago. This red weed, I call it. It makes the fishing really tough, because by May it's all choked out. So now I'm fishing these canals, but basically I've learned when the fish are going to be where and what they're going to feed on. So there's a little hole 3 miles from where I'm sitting, and I got 50 good bass in about an hour and 15 minutes about 3 weeks ago, because
That's
of the water. All our water goes to LA, and they could change it at night, and the fish will become trapped. And then if you're the guy that walks up there, and I'm actually fishing in whitewater, but they're stacked up and they got to eat something. But as soon as somebody sees my truck, the night crawlers come out and it's over. So those fish are.
We're obviously here to talk about big bass and stuff, and you've made the baits that have caught some of the biggest and in incredible numbers. Jerry, what's your personal best? Largemouth.
1712.
Whew.
And
Phenomenal.
a friend caught that fish a couple months before me, and then a year later, another guy caught it on one of my baits, and I didn't even know he caught it. I just happened to go to the lake because it was like the anniversary of what I caught it on. And this guy walks up, and he's got my lure in his pocket, and he gives me a big hug. I didn't even know he'd just let go. They were calling it 19. I don't know if it was 19 because they kind of messed up the weighing part. They weren't trying to break a record or anything, but it was still really, really big. It was.
They need the big
I
bass
don't know if it was 19, but
calculator.
it was bigger than when I caught it. And then, of course, my friend Will reeled in the 18-pounder that Jerry witnessed in person.
Yeah.
That was
But
pretty
on that
cool.
day, you had 2 other fish that day that ate the same bait. At
Right,
the
I
same
had
time.
A
a
double?
12 and a 9 3/4, and at the same time. That was pretty cool. It's
Yeah.
weird because I don't turn around that much, but at least I didn't then. But I saw the fish down deep. I made a turn, and my buddy was actually asleep from driving all night. And he says, "What are you doing? You don't turn around." And I go, "Man, there's two big ones down there." So I hooked the first one, and I'm cranking it in, and all of a sudden it just stopped. And I'm like, "Man, something's wrong." And I mean, I just got real heavy, and I'm cranking it up. I look down, and the 9 3/4 was upside down. I was looking at its belly, and the other one, I could see its eyes on both sides of its belly. I'm like, man, what's it? Anyways, we got two together, and on the same bait, and it. So when this kid and his dad said, "Can we see the fish?" and they were in a rental boat, and they pulled up and go, "Yeah." So my batteries were dead in my camera, and it had 4 batteries. Right? So I popped out the batteries, and I was putting new ones in. I opened a 8-pack, so now I got like 12 batteries laying on the deck of the boat. And the kid looks over and he sees the door of the camera open, but in his mind it was the bass, and he goes, "Oh my God, they caught it on a robot lure." He thought that the batteries came out of the lure.
Oh,
And we're
gee.
like, "No, no, 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 no! I'm just gonna take a picture." And he's yelling around the lake, "They caught it on a robot lure! What? A robot lure!" It was a holiday. What was it? Easter or something?
No, it was Christmas.
Oh yeah, it
It
was
was
Christmas.
it
Yeah,
was
yeah.
the 28th
Christmas
of
vacation,
December,
and then
2000.
so yeah, so the 12 pounder was actually 11.15, and I asked the lake manager, "Are you going to give me 12?" And he goes, "Nope, 11.15. This is a certified scale." Blah blah blah. So in the
Yep.
afternoon, when Will got the 18, I waited, and it said like like 17.14. And I go, "You're gonna," I go, "It's really close to the record, but their scale is light, but it's supposed to be registered." So I
Yeah.
go, "So if we go in there, you're going to lose you're not going to get the record, you're just going to get heartbroken." And Terry and his friend Scott said, "No, man, you got to go weigh that fish right
Yep.
now." And it was
Yep.
18. So, boy, am I glad we
18
did
on the
that.
dot.
So, yeah, and there was a whole crowd of people, and you want to know what happened? That little kid was still there. "They caught it on a robot lure," and then they took him up to 18. It was pretty cool. But the
Yeah.
fact that the kid got to see it up close too, him and his dad. But Terry, there was a guy there that watched the whole thing and met him later on. He was a dentist, and one day at Willow Beach, I got a 52.5 pound striper, and that guy was there. He was at Willow Beach, the same guy that was at Paris. He goes, "You don't remember me?" And I go, "Vaguely," and then I go, "Man, you need to go fishing with me every day because you're good luck. Play the lottery when you're around or something." But anyway, that was pretty cool.
All right, so let's go through the baits that you've designed in chronological order. When you started out painting Rapalas, and
Um,
then go ahead.
Actually, I painted them. Yeah, so I painted Rapalas. You come up with a certain color that works, and you use it all the time. I'm still using the same. I probably caught 10 double-digit brown trout in the same spot, going the same way, same time of day, into the sun, same line, boat, everything. So I don't change much on the Rapalas. I got a color, and I'll either use a chub or this wild rainbow color that I have. And I don't really mess much with kokanee or whatever. But though I did get a double digit about a month ago on a kokanee color. But basically, there was the generic trout hard bait, and then I followed it with the soft bait, which
Mm-hmm.
is, and Scott Whitmer helped me make the molds. You know what I mean? And
Yep. Mm-hmm.
when I met him, but the bait, it already swam and everything, and I was actually pouring plastics into frying pans and then cutting them out with the scissors to make my trout in the beginning. And then once I met Scott, we did some other things, and of course Zank helped us out. He knew everything, and
Yep.
but that went pretty good. So then the generic trout soft bait is still what I fish, and it's 23 years old, and
Yep.
I probably haven't sold any for 15 years because I have so many baits I don't have to sell it. But I've made other baits that work. They're better for trolling, casting. But basically, it went. The next bait was the live trout. It was a hard bait with a soft tail. Then the big tool, which is a 3-piece hard bait, but it has a big soft tail. And
Yep.
that was killed by the BVZ. So then I had the 9 inches. My sales were going good at $100 a piece, but the Spro was only 40, so that kind of killed that. And then that's when I had the lull when I was selling baits, but not, just almost had to quit. And then again, the Skeet Reefs and Byron Velvet stuff. Byron helped me immensely. And then Skeet jumped on board, but it was good to know both of them from catching trophy fish. They knew who
Yep.
I was at the shows. One time that same friend of mine up north, this Rafael Rossi, worked at a place called Outdoor Pro Shop. And when the Bassmasters came to the Delta, he tried to sell Takahiro Mori some rats. He kept saying, "No, that's a toy, man. That's a toy." You know what I mean? And he goes, "I'm not fishing with that." He goes, "No, man, you got to fish this." And he goes, "No, it's a toy." So later on, I ended up sitting next to him at dinner at the Bassathon. I'm sitting next to Takahiro Mori. He goes, "I'm Takahiro Mori, That's a classic winner." I'm like, "Cut it out. This guy's telling me he won I knew he won the classic thing." I messed with him for about 2 hours, and he was like, "The guy doesn't believe me." And I pulled out the rat, and I go, "Remember this boy?" I go, "You could have won earlier." But anyway, it's cool to meet those guys kind of like that.
So this bait,
That's
you gave, this is wood, and you
yeah.
gave this to me in 2001 when I was fishing the Delta divisionals for the Federation, and you gave me 5 of them to go fish that tournament,
Okay.
and yeah, that changed my mind about wake
Hey,
baits.
there's a lot of. Well, you were telling me even when you didn't get the fish, you pulled them out.
Oh, I pulled them out, and they showed me where
It's
they
harder
were,
to
and then I
catch
could
them
go
on
back
something
and
else. Yeah.
exactly. It was insane, and in fact, this is actually the bait, the first one. This is the big one,
Okay. Yeah.
and yeah. So I mean, these are all original Jerry Rago wooden rats from
Yeah.
2001.
And I don't know that you could even sell those for more than what It's weird these days. It's just
I
nobody's
wouldn't want
paying
to
the
sell them.
high dollar for my bait. But there's guys with it's all about the collectors. It's not about the catching. Like say the depths. Everybody's got a depths. It works for everybody. My glide bait, I actually have the only glide bait patent. And but the way things work out, you can't sue everybody, or there's other things, or maybe somebody that knows them. But just actually, here's one, Terry. The guy that's kind of responsible for the glide bait never made a dime off of it, and that's our buddy Greg Villa in Japan. He liked these baits that I made. I didn't care for the action, the lazy action, but he
Yep.
wanted them to fish in Japan. But he mostly used them to draw the fish out of the trees in Japan, and then they would catch them on other baits. And then later on, they couldn't get the bait that Greg had. I think you have one, don't you? It's a
Yeah.
single jointed. It's big, 16 inches, and
Yep.
basically that became the glide bait. My brother made a couple little ones, and he wanted to show me one day. And actually, I think the idea came from my brother, he's only made 2 baits in his whole life, or 3. But there were these little glide baits, and we caught a lot of fish on them. Then I incorporated it into the big one. But I think that Gancraft came out with what happened
Yep.
was that the guys in Japan were buying the generic trout, the $100 bait, and it was probably $200 in Japan. And they were breaking the lip off and adding weight to get what Captain Greg had. And the lazy action, and then the fish arrow guy caught onto it, and he took the Castaic hardhead soft bait and broke the lip off. I've got videos that he sent me catching, a lot of 3 and 4 pound fish in Japan. And then, but Gancraft actually produced the first one I saw, and my buyer from Japan brought him over and said, "We need you to make this bait. This is your bait. It should be real easy for you to make." And I go, but they wanted to pay $30, and at the time we were getting $100. And it's before they took a crash, and I said, "Well, I can't build any bait for that price except maybe the rat." But
right.
And then there was the mother bait, and then I believe is when Depths came along, and Depths had the skin over the resin, and the Butch Brown got onto that one. We all know what he did with that. And actually, if that would have been my bait, I would have used the skin for the mold, because it slips over, but you could have actually could have been really fast labor wise. But again, they were using the resin, and I know that they had trouble too. But Greg, it was kind of he's the one that talked me into making those. But we all went our separate ways, for whatever reason back then. So, but I would almost call him the father of the glide bait. But
I always looked at you as the person that invented the glide bait. I just thought that Greg was selling them. I met Greg when we were 10 years old at Long Beach Casting Club, tying flies. But I always thought it was you that invented. I didn't know it was actually Greg that did that. And now today you can't sell a bait unless it's a glide bait.
Yeah, he just wanted me to. He just liked them. He saw but he found a place where it worked. And then, for those of you who don't know, there's a technique called dead sticking. Terry's dad is the godfather of dead sticking. Dead sticking has caught a lot of big bass for a lot of guys, and some guys in tournaments. Todd Holder, he was famous for dead sticking at Lake Casitas. But anyways, that's pretty cool. That's a cool name, But the glide thing, I kind of gave up.
Dead Stick Dick is what they used to call my dad.
What'd they call him?
Dead Stick Dick. Because his name was Richard. I'm 100% serious on that. It's funny.
My next door neighbor, his name is Dick Longus. And I'm not kidding you. You can look in the phone book.
That's hilarious. But so it's funny. I was on Bailey Egbert's podcast earlier this week, and he had never heard about dead sticking. And I told him about, guys taking a castaic, hard bait, and just throwing it out, and, over 40 foot of water on a point, and just leaving it sit there. And all of a sudden, 3 minutes later, a fish would come up, 12-pounder or 15-pounder would come up and crash on it, and boom, you're on. And nobody even considers that today.
Yeah, right. A couple of years ago, it really got hot at Diamond Valley with big bluegill baits, and I have a Chinese manufacturer that I've done a bunch of baits where it's under the name of Thunderhawk. But basically, I get a royalty for my designs and for use of the patents. But I gave him a bluegill that I think was a better idea than the tool, but it hasn't come out yet. Actually, we're going to split it, and we're going to make a big one, meaning about this big, and then a fishable one for what most guys would use. But that one, I think it was special, but he's got caught up in other things. Actually, my manufacturer got raided by the Chinese government because he was making some metal part, and they tried to say he was making guns, but it set him back about 6 months, but he wasn't making guns. But he's making lure. It's something to do. But anyway, you never know what's going to happen overseas.
Yeah.
So, but that whole the dead sticking thing, I've done it in the past. I won't tell you that I've got a giant, but I've hooked a couple. It's hard to get them in because of the way they grab the bait, and you actually didn't set the hook, in the beginning. So and then the weight of those baits, they can throw them. I made a 13-inch glide bait, and a lot of guys asked me for it, and I probably could have sold a couple hundred. But to me, there wasn't enough hook, and I didn't want to get the reputation that I hooked my biggest bass ever and it threw the Rago. And if you put bigger hooks, I don't think you're going to get bit. It's just 13 inches. How big are you going to put? you
Yeah.
know, 6-aught hooks or whatever. But and of course, partly because the way they grab a hard bait, they try to grab the head or by the back or whatever. Whereas a soft
Yeah.
bait, I wish somebody could explain to me how they can eat the same bait, a hard one, and they're hooked on the front hook, and a soft bait exactly the same is swallowed all the way in their stomach sometimes. I still
Yeah,
haven't
it's
figured
crazy.
that one out. I've got a new glide bait, probably about 6 months away. It'll be different. Will it be better? Um, it'll be a new way to sell them, and it'll be better for the guy that needs something different. So it'll
But the
totally,
other
and
thing
it'll be
is,
copied the first hour.
so what do you think of all?
What's the
What do
Go
you
ahead.
think of all these? What do you think of all these other? I mean, when you and I met, I mean, there was essentially maybe 4 or 5 people that were making baits. Now you can't swing a swim bait rod without hitting someone that's making a swim bait.
No, and it's just and then and it's not just about. It's not even big ones anymore. A guy will pose with I'm not kidding, with a pound and a quarter fish because he caught it on a swim bait. Put his picture all over the internet. It's so different now. But then there is still guys chasing them down. But there's the water's polluted by a lot of different baits. Some are good, some aren't. But I'm just saying, like, say, how do the fish make up their mind? And they're constantly being bombed. That's why I'm trying to do something different all the time. I'm working on a thing. It's like a dip sea diver for surface lures. In other words, it brings a diving bait to the surface as opposed to floating bait pulling it down. It's the opposite, and it does several things. And the problem is, it can be copied for $1. I even tried to give it to Bass Pro Shops, but the buyer is he's a little tough, and I just wanted my name on it. And I could post it tonight and it'd go across the country, but no one would ever buy one from me because they could just walk down the store and make their own in a second. But it's made a difference for catching fish. Like I said, I'm always trying to make. It's got to be something different, even if it's the same lure. Sometimes it's from top hook to bottom hook to weedless. Just I talked with you one time about a technique I was working on called side shot, where the line would go basically through the bait like an inline soft bait in front of the dorsal fin or wherever the balance point was. The line went through, then you're going to use like probably if it's a big bait, a 1 ounce or 2 ounce drop shot weight, and where you can throw it over the point that you probably got followed on or it's a known spot for fish. Then you could actually get on the trolling motor and swim to the other side, and the bait would actually turn and face the other direction. And of course it's balanced, and then you could let it set on the bottom, lift it up because you're away from the bait, as opposed to drop shotting straight down. Drop shotting is completely taken over the trout fishing, by the way.
is that right?
For big fish too, really big fish, and that came from bass fishing. So
Wow.
just, anyway, but anyway, we'll see with these the glide baits. That hey, some of them are just incredibly realistic, especially the ones with the paintbrush tails.
Yep.
But there's 50 of those that look exactly the same.
So it was
different
Buka,
lines.
Mike Buka is the guy that came out with that. You got to give him
But then
credit
the
for
other
that.
guy says it was him. The
That wasn't. It was Buka.
HGH guy. Buka used to get baits from me. So
Yeah, he did. He
but,
bought his first swim baits were from you and Scott,
yeah.
and he couldn't afford to buy them, so he ends up making them himself. And
Yeah.
school hard knocks, and
I'm planning on going to Isabella tomorrow. I haven't been there for quite a while,
Oh God.
and Scott's hitman Ryan is there, so I'm
Yep.
coming for you, Ryan.
So let me ask you this: why haven't you been to Dwarshak or Pardee to try to get a world record
I
smallmouth?
did Pardee a little bit, but the problem was I kept going to Colorado River, and they didn't want my boat there. And the Colorado River to me is the cleanest water I ever fished. But the Dwarshak, it's been on the list a little bit. But like I said, I'm getting through the grandkids, letting them get a little older. But yeah, remember Will lives in Idaho, and
Yep.
but that 50-mile run is a little bit different too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and there's no other ramp, but it's been
Nope.
on the radar a little bit. There's a little lake north of me that they're a trout lake that they're up to 5 pounds in a couple of years. So I might, um, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that one first. But I just went to Havasu for the first time this year, and did stripers, smallmouth, largemouth. Hit the real big smallmouth and lost it. Hit the Bimini top, which it's hot down there, right? But and I wanted to dabble in flatheads while I was there, but too much wind to fish at night. But I'm starting to get around. I got a new girl, and she likes fishing and makes more money than I do. So she likes the boat. So
She's got a trophy husband.
well,
There you
she's
go.
got a
There you
22-foot
go.
caravel, and I got to take that out and pretend that I like to go fast. But really, I want to fish in my. I still have the same boat. I like it.
Yeah.
So just I wasn't the prototypical bass guy, but luckily I was the prototypical big bass guy. So just we'll see. What else you guys got?
Actually, Jerry, I was wondering if we can get you on again sometime soon to talk rats, because that's something else that you're
Sure.
enormously
Okay.
famous for. We got a lot of stuff more to talk about, but we rather than go on and keep adding to this show, I want to have you back,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
want to talk rats. I want to talk Mike Long, and I really want to get into your tips on how to fish your baits and things like glide baits and rats.
Sure.
Because when you and I did a story years ago for Bass Times about rats, I thought you had some amazing tips, including one tip about tying a lead sinker on a extension of line and then throwing it up into the weeds so that the sinker would go into the tules, but the bait would stay out. That one blew my mind.
Sure. Yeah, and I've done everything I think I possibly could with a rat. I'm still learning every day. The one thing I try to tell guys, if we can do it on this one, is like let's just say Tackle Warehouse orders more small rats than big rats. But what I've noticed is you catch way more fish on the big rat because it's like the guy that goes to jail. He's got to take out the big guy because he wants to eat. So I think they play with the little rats and crush the big ones, even 1 pounders. But we'll go through that later because I just like I say, I've got about 20 different ones. They all do something different, whether it's swimming in an X pattern or a partial, where the back has a wider action or the front has a wider action. For me, I have a couple. Um, I think I'm gonna kill Isabella with the cranking rat, the deep diving rat. It just does too many things. But we'll get back to the last time I did an interview was with a striper guy back east, and literally 20 minutes after we hung up, we did it by phone. I had 20 minutes later, I had two 20-pound stripers, and I didn't go to Willow Beach for 7 years. And it was really, but I never called him back to tell him what I got. But it was really cool to not go to a place for 7 years and then go there and just instantly and who's this guy? You know what I mean? And I told everybody down there at Colorado River, I said, don't post your fish I go, because I know you're not using the glide baits you say they are, because none of them have a scratch on them. I go, but I go, I'm not trying to get you to buy my baits. Just don't. I go, there's 20 guys like me that'll show up. And soon, one of these California guys is going to go to Texas. And we all know that they bite. When they bite, and everybody catches them. But I'd like to go to Lake Fork. So my buddy Mickey's down there. I'd like to come show him how it's done again.
Scott's
I think I got
down there now.
Yeah, I always. Oh yeah. And I heard Dobbins is down there now too.
Dobbins is down there. Barrick is down there.
Is Stump down there too? Did you tell me that?
Yep. Greg Stump's
No,
down there.
Greg Stump helped me for a little while. Man, great guy. Not what I thought he was. You know what I mean? He's a good guy. But
Yep.
yeah, just but the dirty water, I gotta learn. That's a learning curve right there. So
Yep.
used to this clear water. That's you know what I mean. So but we'll figure it out. So
Cool.
all right. Well, thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, Jerry,
Yeah.
thank you so much. You're a fabulous guest, enormously knowledgeable. You're one of the nicest guys in the sport, and I've long admired you and your work. So thanks so much. And we're going to have you on soon. We'll get that scheduled here right away because I'm dying to talk rats with you. I'm dying to talk technique. We hadn't had a chance to talk technique yet, so I want to go there.
Sure. Yeah, I think it'd be interesting for you. Yeah, it's just like I said, I'm 3 miles from the nearest pond right here. It's there's some sevens swimming around in there. I've seen them. You know what I mean? And then there's another spot about 8 miles. I've got a couple nines when there is none. So it's and those are pretty much all ratfish. So we'll fix her up. So
Oh, fantastic. Well, I'm looking
Awesome.
forward to that one. Hey, folks, it's time to slam the door on this episode of the Big Bass Podcast. Thank you for joining us. We know your time is valuable, and we appreciate your spending some of it with us. If you enjoy the show with Jerry Rago, and how could you not, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. And if you really liked it, please share the show with your friends. It would help us a lot. If you're a Big Bass junkie, check out our website at thebigbasspodcast.com. You'll find our Big Bass Podcast calculator, which is good for bass who are 14.5 pounds, and prepared by Dr. Terry Battisti himself. And we have lists of state record largemouth, smallmouth, and spotted bass there. If you'd like to contact us, you can reach us via email at ken@thebigbasspodcast.com, Terry at thebigbasspodcast.com, and the great Nathan Benson at nathan@thebigbasspodcast.com. Please join us again next week. We'll have another story about another big bass or important person in the big bass world that you will not and you cannot find anywhere else. And remember, size matters.